Welcome back once again, engineers. With our previous episode covering our train setup, it is now at last time to cover that most tantalizing of topics, the space platform. We touched on this a bit in setting up the space science before, and most of the concepts you learn in setting that up will apply to this next platform with one critical difference. This platform will not remain in orbit, but will move from one orbit to another. The main things we'll be reapplying is the circuit logic we used to monitor and control our asteroid chunks, by first monitoring the main belt, as well as the asteroid collectors and the stores that they have internally that are actually pulling the resources. We'll also be adding these handy-dandy thrusters, which require two things: fuel and oxidizer. We will also need to protect the platform in flight from larger asteroid chunks while we're in motion, which, early on, can be done using gun turrets with simple yellow ammo. We're going to add some laser turrets to the sides at the back, but with a couple of caveats we're going to walk through in a bit. Once we have the platform built, we'll discuss how it's meant to work, as well as some quirks when starting up a fresh platform, and some ways you can speed up supplying it. The other thing to touch on just before we walk through the space platform itself, we need to upgrade the flow of green circuits to allow for a greater flow of blue chips. This is because we need these for research, but we also need it for manufacturing rocket parts needed to supply and produce platforms later on. We just simply copy and paste the previous line and slap it next to our rockets for now. I'm going to be limiting Novice to 4 rocket silos, primarily because I don't have a guaranteed flow of resources like I'd prefer to have. We also are planning to upgrade Novice with newer, shinier buildings derived from the other planets later on, so making something final isn't in my personal scope at this particular moment. So first, a little speed up of us designing the initial shape, then we'll do a full breakdown of the platform and walk through how it's meant to operate going from front to back. Okay, now we're here with it manually, where we can kind of manipulate and stuff and show everything that's going on. So we're gonna go from the top all the way down to the bottom, and then we'll talk about how we're actually routing our circuits and all that stuff. So, zooming in here, the first thing that you'll notice is that we have a line of gun turrets and this happy, constantly moving belt of yellow ammo. This is actually very important because we don't want our ammo to be stagnant at any given time. It's very important that we keep a constant supply of yellow ammo at all times here. So we've got gun turrets here with yellow ammo to crack down any of the larger asteroids that come our way between any of these planets that we're going to be going to. We then have our asteroid collectors, which have a little bit of circuit logic here to kind of explain this in a very, very general sense. We have a combinator here, a decider, that is going to be looking at a couple of signal combinations here. Primarily, we are looking at a red signal directly from the collector itself, and then we're sending a green signal to this. This keeps our input and our output semi-separated here. We then have a green signal that's going to be strung between all of these combinators going back to a brain, which is going to be looking at this in order to read the values that we're looking at. So we're comparing these numbers all together, which is why we're adjusting this down to 10 rather than 11, which I believe is what we had on the other platform. So we collect internally until we have essentially 10 or 11 of these all together, and that gives us enough of a buffer there. Then we have these guys, which are set to an automatic filter based on what's needed on the belt down here. So that's all getting routed in a variety of different ways. We'll go over that later. This is how each collector is operating, albeit with the combinators in slightly different places. You'll also notice that we have some accumulators and solar panels with these two little green dots. These are upcycled quality pieces that we're using because space is a premium on these platforms, so we want to make sure we keep our space as little as possible. So we then come down here, and this is our magazine manufacturing, which we have a stockpile of metallic asteroids broken down into ore and also broken down into plates. So we're having these guys serve as a plate bank, and the belt itself also as a plate bank, so that we can make as many magazines as we need depending on our current circumstances. And once again, the magazines are fed, going through all the way around to where each of these turrets are going to be supplied at. We have 4 at the front, 3 on each side, right here, with a little bit of protection on these hard points that could get hit. So, this then brings us down to our asteroid collection and processing. So, we have a central belt here where all of the chunks get sent to. We then have, of course, these crushers, but then all of these ones that are set to crush specific asteroid chunks and get a specific resource out, and then send them down to their own individual processes. The reason that we need this a little bit separate is going to become clear in just a moment. We're then throwing in our panels anywhere that we can get a little bit of extra space, and throwing in... We don't actually need those right there, we can get rid of that. Because we should be able to fit another little accumulator right there, which is always a good thing to have. So, where is all of this going? They come right past the platform hub, carbonic on one side and our iron ore on the other side. And then we have ice that's actually getting split into 2 different areas and turning that ice directly into water. Because we need water for processing our fuel and oxidizer. And then these come down here with this kind of weird threading that we have in order to power our thrusters. So, if this is a little bit confusing to you, don't worry, I will provide a blueprint string in the description that you can have a look at this and see how it looks manually yourself. I do recommend, if you can, upgrade the collectors to the 2 green dots or even the 3 blue dots if you can, because that gives you more arms and more range for these guys to actually come out and grab. But for now, these will suffice for our current needs. Oh, and then we do also have some cargo bays back here. These will each give us an inventory bonus size of 20. So when we look at the platform here, you can see we've got plenty of space right here that we can use, and that's fantastic. So, we've got ourselves a space platform that we're generally happy with. We have a way to defend it, a way to collect resources, process resources, and we have a way to move the platform. Now comes the most difficult decision in the game, which is where do we actually go first? So I went ahead and researched all 3 planets. However, if you haven't researched them yet, you'll find them right after the space platform thruster research. You'll have Fulgora, Gleba, and Vulcanus. And researching these will give us a little bit of info that we can go through and determine what we want to do. So to find that info, easiest way is to go up to the space map. And here you can see Novice, which is where we are right now, and you can see some of our space platforms are in orbit right here. You'll see that there's a little space route between each of these, as well as one that goes between these 2. Biggest thing you can get from here is you first off would look right here hovering Novice. You can see the day-night cycle. Gravity doesn't matter all that much here. Magnetic field, pressure. The biggest things are going to be the solar power and atmosphere and the day-night cycle for down on the ground. As well as at the very, very bottom, you'll see a solar power in space is 300%. Go over here to Vulcanus as an example. You'll see that the day-night cycle is 1 minute and 30, which is incredibly fast in comparison. We'll also see here that the solar power in atmosphere is 400%, which is even more than what's in the atmosphere, which is even more than what's in orbit around Novice. And solar power in space here is 600%. So, solar power would be a great way to go over here. We can also look at the route by clicking on that, and you'll see here a fancy little graph. What this basically tells us is what we can expect to see, and as you can see, just looking at this, we're looking at about 1 kilometer before we start to see any medium asteroids begin to surface. Now, medium asteroids are larger chunks. These are ones that will actually do damage if they hit your station. This is why we have the defenses. You'll see here they have 100% resistance to electric, and 30% resistance to explosion, and 10% resistance to physical. So physical is kind of our go-to, especially since laser is 90%. There's only one reason we want the laser turrets on our sides, and that's because when we're sitting like this, sometimes you can see from the little chunks, things can come and hit our sides, and we don't necessarily want to throw magazines all the way down on the sides. So we have these turrets hooked up specifically to turn on when we have 0 velocity, and we want to just kind of protect ourselves from the sides while we're in orbit somewhere. When we're in motion, these turn off because we don't want to just hit things randomly and for no reason. Here we want to shoot anything that's directly in front of us for protection, and then we want to shoot things in front and to the sides for collection. We then look over at Gleba, a day-night cycle of 10 minutes, which is actually longer than Novice. We could also see that solar power in the atmosphere is 50%. So solar panels will only be half as effective on the surface. However, solar power in space is still 200%, which still isn't as good as Novice's in orbit, but it's still better than what you'd have on Novice proper. And again, we can see here another little chart of what we can expect to see. Don't worry about this chart too much. This only becomes important later on, and we'll see that later. Finally, we have Fulgora. Now, Fulgora is out here a little bit farther, which has a couple of interesting issues that you might be able to see. One of them is the day-night cycle is 3 minutes, and solar power in space is 120%, while in atmosphere it's only 20%. That might seem like a problem, but there's a couple of little fun tricks on Fulgora that will kind of come into play. You'll also notice as we've been hovering over these that there have been contains, which shows all the resources that are on that planet, as well as a little brief brief description at the top. So Vulcanus, it says, hot volcanic planet with bounteous volcanoes, rivers of lava, plains of ash, and sulfuric acid geysers, rich in metals. Lava can only be crossed by elevated rail, which we'll go over that some. Gleba, a humid, swampy planet with deep bogs, snaking hills, and fertile land. Rich in nutrients, swamp terrain can be landfilled. High ground impedes railway but is needed for agriculture. And then Fulgora, a dry, windswept planet with lightning storms on plateaus, and oceans of oil that can be bridged by elevated rails. There appear to be some ruins. Something you'll notice here is that elevated rails and railways get mentioned frequently on all three of these. And that's because there's very valid use cases for elevated rails on all three. The question now becomes, where do we go? That is a question that I'm going to leave up to you guys to decide. Go ahead and put a comment down on a planet that you would like to see explored first, or one that you're having some struggles with, and see if we can get those addressed. Next time, we will decide on a planet, and we will go ahead and land on there to establish a beachhead. Until then, I hope that you guys have a wonderful time. I hope that your factories are growing and never shrinking. And until next time, remember, the factory always will grow.